Hello everyone and welcome back to 27 Fox Place. I have a few organizing projects to do in the kitchen, but I have a few dishes that I need to put away before I get started today, and I need to clean out the spice cabinet and organize the spices, and I'm finally getting around to a project that's been on my list for about 4 years now. And I'll be sure to talk more about that later. If you're new here, my name is Randy and I live in Southern California with my husband and our 2 fur babies, Ace and Callie, and I make videos for cleaning and organizing motivation. And I share the tips and tricks that I use to maintain a clean and tidy home, and I post new videos every Friday, so if you enjoy this type of content, be sure to take a minute and hit that subscribe button, and of course remember to give the video a thumbs up before you go.
Hello, Ramona. I can't shake the simplest feeling beyond the goal. We stand on the opposite shore. Hello, Ramona. I reach through mysterious ceilings. I only hope. I look for the things I don't know. Show me where the ending goes. Honestly, I should be the last to know. All in this, I stand alone.
And now that everything's put away, I need to pull out the old dish towels that we use in the kitchen. The old towels were starting to look more like rags than hand towels, so I picked up a new set at Costco and they've been washed and folded, and I just need to replace the old ones with the new ones.
Hello, I mistook you.
And there is still a little bit of life left in the old towels, but I may have to toss them. There are signs of wear and some of them are stained, so I don't think the donation center will accept them.
I push back the serious feeling, the end's unknown.
We eat avocados almost every day, and I leave them on the counter to ripen, and once they're perfectly ripe, I store them in the fridge to keep them from going bad. We have a bunch of ripe bananas that are perfect for banana bread, so I need to make up a batch because I don't think that they'll last another day, and I want to get the bread in the oven so that it can bake while I work on the spice pantry. I keep the stand mixer out on the countertop because it's more convenient to use than a hand mixer, and with the stand mixer, I can have my hands free to add the ingredients to the bowl while the mixer is running. I don't always have the time to make banana bread when I have bananas that are ripe enough, so whenever I measure out the ingredients to make a batch, I measure out enough for another batch or 2, and then I'll store them in the pantry, and that way I only need to measure out the wet ingredients. This is a grain-free recipe that I make all the time, and I'll be sure and leave a link in the description box, and I have enough bananas to make 2 batches, but I only have enough mix to make 1 batch of banana muffins. So I'll store the rest of the bananas in the freezer, and I can use them to make smoothies. The recipe I'm using makes enough batter for 12 standard muffins, and I set up the baking liners for large muffins, so there's only enough batter to fill 6 muffin cups. So I put the unused liners back in the cabinet. The oven is still preheating, so I can clean up while I'm waiting for the oven. And kitchen cleanup is so much easier if I start with an empty dishwasher, and I can just put all the dirty dishes straight into the dishwasher instead of letting them pile up in the sink. This spice pantry holds all the oils, vinegars, and seasonings that we use to cook with, and there's a few things that need to be decluttered so that there's room for what needs to be here. And the top shelf is cluttered with spice jars that are empty and don't fit in this cabinet. And this cabinet is long overdue for a deep clean, so I'm going to empty out the cabinet, and I need to clear off the countertop so that I have some room to work.
I woke up in the middle of the night. And I wondered how you're always right. It gets me.
Some of the shelves were in worse shape than others, and this cabinet has 2 stationary shelves and 2 adjustable shelves, and I don't really need to remove the shelves to clean them, but I thought I might want to reposition the shelves.
But you showed me how to believe. Still gets me. When I look back, I can see you're hiding, waiting for a moment to step in. And I'll never understand how you.
And I'm just using a damp microfiber cloth to clean the gunk out, and then I'm using Method's Wood for Good to clean up everything else, and a drop or 2 of dish soap or a few drops of oil will help dissolve any stubborn grease. And the microfiber really is all I need to clean these shelves, but I have an extra bottle of wood cleaner that I need to use up.
It is hard to share my thoughts.
I have 2 shelves left to clean before I can put everything back, and I was right in the middle of cleaning the first one when the timer went off for the muffins.
But I know that you need it all.
And if you want to make muffins with your favorite banana bread recipe, just cut the baking time in half, and the muffins are ready when a toothpick comes out clean.
You're staying. When I look back, I can see you're hiding, waiting for a moment to step in. And I'll never understand how you saw it coming. Oh, but I will love you for it all. When I look back, I can see you're hiding.
I'm not quite sure exactly when I stopped using these spice jars, but they've been taking up space in the cabinet for much too long. So I'll wash them up, and if I can think of another use for them, I'll keep them. But I'll probably add them to the donation pile. And I found this bottle to decant the oil that I use to cook with the most. And there's not a lot of storage space next to the stove, so I try to keep things that I use the most on the countertop so that they're easy to get to. And light and air can oxidize certain types of oils. So if your oil comes packaged in a dark bottle, then it needs to be protected from the light. And this bottle comes with two different tops, and the one I'm using is hinged at the top to keep out the air and the light, but it's still easy to pour out the oil. When I'm cooking with spices, I try to wipe off the bottles before I put them away, but they still end up with sticky smudges, so before I put all the seasonings back in the cabinet, I want to wipe down all of the containers. And we go through these spices pretty quickly so they're not too grimy.
I could feel this way, and it's kinda strange. Don't even know your name. I don't know you, but I want to.
I ended up putting the top shelf back in the same place so that the taller bottles on the lower shelf would still fit, and the middle shelf is stationary, and it's the best place for the bottles that we use the most.
Just wanna get to know you. You say that you're from out of town. I'm hoping that you stick around. Show me what it's like from the other side. Would you stay another night? 'Cause I don't know you, but I want to get to know you. Just wanna get to know you.
There isn't enough to alphabetize things, so I've just organized them by type and size, and I put all the bottles together on one shelf and all the spices together. And it's simple and it looks nice, but it also helps to keep things organized. I couldn't think of another arrangement that would work without moving the middle shelf, so I ended up putting all the shelves back in the same place. And all the spices that I reach for the most are on the top shelf, and all of the tallest bottles are on the bottom shelf, and their height makes it easier to reach them so I don't have to bend down quite as far. And all of the most used bottles are together on the middle shelf, and in order to make room for a bottle of oil that was missing, I moved all the smaller bottles down one shelf.
It was always on fire, our house, our dreams. We were dancing on a wire, reckless it seemed. We found holes in these walls, we like what we saw. Seems so strong until it falls, the final straw. Oh, I never felt like this before. When I was trapped, you showed an open door. Living in a dark, clouded haze, we danced, we fought. We were bound to make mistakes, real love, we thought. But it was always on fire, our house, our dreams. We were dancing on wire, reckless it seemed.
The The spices that we use in smaller quantities are kept in these drawers, but there were a few problems with these jars, so about 4 years ago, I bought a set of jars to replace them, and they've been sitting in the closet collecting dust all this time. And then about a year ago, I found them when I cleaned out the closet, so I bought a new set of labels and ran them all through the dishwasher, and then put them all right back in the box, and now I'm finally getting it checked off my list. And this set of jars comes with 2 sets of labels, but I wasn't crazy about them, so I found a different set of labels that I liked better.
You tell me you're scared.
Working one jar at a time, I started transferring the contents to the new jars and then adding the labels to the tops of the jars, and I needed the labels to all face the same direction when I put them in the drawer, and after I put on the first label, I realized that I needed to put the lid on the jar before I put on the label. Because the jars are square, I had to line up the label with the front edge of the jar.
I know it's hard. I know it's rough, but we'll make it through. And I'll back you up.
In order to keep spices in the drawers, I needed labels on the top so that I could find what I needed, and most of the standard jars that spices come in are too tall to fit in the drawers, and most are not labeled on the top, so I wouldn't be able to find anything. And the old jars are short enough to fit in the drawers, and I found labels for the tops, and even though they were the right height, there were still a few things that just weren't working. And because the jars are round, the labels were never facing the same direction, and the jars were also much smaller than most spice jars, so they weren't big enough to hold a full jar of spice, so I always had leftover spice that needed to be stored someplace else.
You tell me you're nervous.
White labels have a tendency to yellow over time, so I wanted to try black labels, and I love the look of the white against the matte black background. But this was about the time that my balloon deflated. I ordered some labels from Amazon, and when I got them, I flipped through the pages, but apparently I didn't notice that the last few had a gloss finish, and I'm not sure if it was a fluke with just my order or if it's something else, but it was so frustrating to discover the problem when it was too late to fix it.
I'll still be here. We'll fix these mistakes. Wherever you're going, I'm going to. I'll follow you through the black and the blue. Whatever the mountain, we'll climb to the next. Honey, I'm with you through life and to death. Wherever you're going, I'm going.
It's pretty easy to transfer the contents from one small jar to another, but the larger jars need a funnel, and the set comes with a silicone funnel, but the spice sticks to the silicone, and I would have to wash the funnel between each spice jar. So instead, I rolled up a piece of wax paper to use as a funnel, and I used the wax paper, but parchment or any other type would work just as well.
Close your eyes. Get some rest. I'm by your side.
One of the mistakes I made when I first set up the spice jars was not recording the expiration date on the jars, and it's something that I didn't do in this video, but because I have no idea how old some of the spices are, I decided to put the current date on the bottom of each jar, and I'll get rid of anything that I still have a year from now, and I'll update the expiration dates as I refill the jars with new spices.
The world could fall down, it's gonna be okay. The sun could go out, we're gonna be okay. If all the blue skies fade to gray, we're gonna be okay. Calm your soul, hold my hand. Don't let go. I understand. I know it hurts. It wasn't fair.
And once I emptied all the old spice jars, I grabbed the extra jars from the pantry to refill the bottles with any extra spices I had on hand.
The world could fall down, it's gonna be okay. The sun could go out, we're gonna be okay. If all the blue skies fade to gray, we're gonna be okay.
One of the reasons that I started with the labels on the tops of the jars is because I wasn't sure how long it was going to take to get all the jars labeled, and if I could get the tops labeled, then I would still be able to use the spices, but I thought it would be easier to position the labels on the front of the jars if I lined them up all together. So I lined up the labels on the first two jars so that I can use them as a reference point, and to make sure each label was lined up evenly, I used a piece of masking tape to create a line where I needed to put each label.
Feathers in my hair and braids around my waist. I'm almost a bird. These mountain views and pink sunsets got me shitting skin. Ooh, ah. Ooh, ah. We all strive to be more. We all long for Viva La Vida. Around the corner I'll meet ya, a bit lighter and freer. I'm so happy to see ya. And the air fills up my lungs and it tickles.
I don't have enough spices to fill every jar. I think this set has 48 spice jars, which is much more than I need, but I wanted to have enough jars to fill each drawer in case I needed extra in the future, and I can store the empty bottles in the back of each drawer, which will help to keep them from moving around every time I open and close the drawer.
We long for Viva La Vida. Around the corner I'll meet ya, a bit lighter and freer. I'm so happy to see ya.
There's just a little bit of cleanup to do before I'm done for the day, and I plan on donating the old spice jars, but I want to clean them up first, so I'll run the jars through the dishwasher and I'll wash the lids by hand, and then I can add them to the donation pile so that I can drop them off one of these days. Muffins and a smoothie are my go-to on busy mornings, but without preservatives, they don't last very long. So I'll keep them in the freezer, and they defrost quickly at room temperature, but I can also pop them in the microwave for about 30 seconds or so. That's all for today. I hope this video gave you a little motivation to work on that project that you've been putting off forever. And if you like this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications before you go. And thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I hope to see you next time.